of a church, and I was a leader in the church when the pandemic happened. And so I was like the youngest person, and I was the one that had to figure out how we're going to do like virtual services and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
And at that time, teaching a bunch of people who could barely know how to access their, email, how to join a Zoom meeting, and then what to actually do on a Zoom meeting and all that stuff was a whole experience. But one of the things that we very quickly learned that we needed to do is to have everybody always be on mute when they join. And we didn't do a waiting room, but we definitely had like a moderator who was like ready to kick people out, which was very weird in like a religious situation to be like, oh, who's going to get punched out of the room next?
I know. Yeah, excommunicated from the Zoom call.
So that was fun as a member of a community, try to figure out how like people and technology, interact with that. So,
well,
anywho,
I hadn't really factored that into my calculus that, I'm used to meetings that are closed, business meetings, and you have a prescribed list of attendees. But then when you open this up broadly, for a public forum, boy, you got to be guarded and ready.
You saw me. I wasn't really ready. I told my wife, and I was like, I certainly don't want to watch what happened, but I want to watch everybody else's reactions to how I was like, yeah. So I haven't gotten around to doing that yet. But anyway, all right. People will be mysteriously confused if they watch this recording as to what we're talking about, but
right.
It's a secret. All right. So I'm in the Miro board. I can share my screen, and then one of the things I'm thinking, since at the moment it's the same crew of folks, is maybe we could just like go back to where we left off last time. I could copy that down. Let's see. Not the screen.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Just the right screen. Yeah. Okay. Here we go. So we can just change this to be the September 6th and 20th meeting. And then maybe take a look at where things landed here. And if there's any things I got to go look at my notes. I do want to have like 3 or 4 minutes to find some stuff that I had compiled to add to the board. So maybe I'll just start a timer for all the timers. I'll start a timer for like 4 minutes now, and then we can add extra topics if you think of it. And I'm gonna have to find where it was.
Yeah, I just added a couple topics that came up on the GitHub where, they're pretty broad topics. So I didn't want to, be spending the time answering in text. I figured this would be a good format.
Yeah. Oh, that way too, we could record it and you could have the clip, and then you could post a clip to, this is how we answer the question. So by the way, I'm totally cool with that. If there's things where you sometimes, especially if it's like not too many people, I'm not going to speak for Stefano here, but Brian, if there's like if you have a backlog, if it's just going to be easier to talk about these things, and just knock out things quickly within the hour of the Lane Coffee, I'm perfectly okay with that.
Yeah, so I added them in there in case you guys are interested in the topics. But I don't at least this time, I don't feel like we specifically have to get to them. I think it was Justin from the community is the one who posed the questions. I invited him, so if he shows up, I think that would be a good time to go into it. But if he doesn't show up, then I'm fine with sticking to whatever we agree is top priority today.
All right, I've added a couple that are sort of minor, mostly because I sort of troubleshotted. I don't know what that word is. Some things on my own, and I couldn't figure out like actually how it works. So anyway, I added a few things here. Stefano, did you have anything else you wanted to add to the Miro board?
No, I'll follow the lead here. I do have some technical glitches I'm running into, but I noted we're not to address those unless they've been documented in the Git. So I want to wait until I can properly document them, and then we can go from there. But
So Stefano, those are probably you're referring to the Smart Connect app?
yeah,
Yeah.
I thank you for your help. It was my oversight as far as custom GPT. So I've got that. But I'm running into some other issues that I want to just really understand before I throw out a false negative. So I am having some issues with that, and just
Okay.
chatting with my notes. Basically, my resume to job description matching is kind of broken at this point. So
Okay, yeah. If you create a GitHub issue, I'll definitely check it out. But I just want to also mention that the Smart Connect app is a little bit behind right now. Like I pretty much spent since the last meeting getting the plugin up to speed. And, now a lot of the changes that happened in the plugin, since they share a lot of the same open source components, the Smart Connect app still needs to catch up. Plus there's a few things I want to add specifically to the Smart Connect app. But so whatever the issues you're running into, like if you post about them, in the next few days, that would be a great time because I'll be, hopping into that code.
okay. And when you speak to shared open source, is that your JS Brains?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, there's, I would say 90% of all the code is shared between the plugin and the app via those JS Brains components.
And as I track your changes and the change logs, I do detect that you're making changes to the JS Brains, which then are foundational to probably the plugin and the Smart Connect proxy and app.
Yeah. Yeah. So, long-term vision for JS Brains is actually somewhat like a framework that people could use to build, similar software. So, like there's kind of almost like a meme in the AI space, which is like all of these startups are like they're essentially chat with your PDF startups.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that with the open source components that I'm building there, I could provide a demo or like example where it's like, build this chat with your PDF application and, in really very few lines of code, and that application would work in the browser. There could be another example to make it a desktop app. So the beauty of that open source project is it's all vanilla JavaScript for the most part. So there's a little bit of Node.js in there, but I actually make it not dependent on Node.js because that's what enables the mobile version of the Obsidian plugin to work. Because the mobile version of Obsidian does not have access to Node.js like the desktop app does.
Mm-hmm.
But that side effect makes it so that the code in that open source repository ends up working, virtually everywhere that you can run a web browser.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, very elegant, I think. So I like the architecture, and I kind of followed that as I saw the micro changes you were making to JS Brains. So
Yeah.
cool.
And then, just one like last little bit, like, the JS Brains, like the reason like for the name, is because I spend a lot of my time learning about the brain. And, there's specifically this guy, Jeff Hawkins. he writes the Thousand Brains book and also On Intelligence. And he takes a look at like how the brain works, but from like a technology perspective. And I really think it's like one of the best architectures, for, building an intelligent application that I've come across. So, a lot of the changes are like me trying to figure out how can I make the code better reflect this cortical architecture. And the beauty of that is like if I can get it to like emulate that cortical architecture that he describes, it's a like a recursive type of system. So really it's like once that base is developed, that like base architecture, you can just add layer upon layer upon layer. And with those layers, I think you can do really, really cool things. So that's like the high level direction, from a cognitive architecture standpoint.
Okay, cool.
Sweet. That was a fun little side conversation. So I captured some notes around that here.
Oh, cool. Yeah, and if you guys are interested in the cognitive architecture stuff, I think his books are very accessible. Like they're fun listens, and like I think he does a great job of packing a lot of information in. I can tell you that I own the hard copies and the Audible versions of both books. Like I've highlighted the hard copies and I've listened to the Audible versions of each book easily a dozen times, which is pretty, it's like that's definitely an outlier. Like I listen to a lot of books multiple times, when they deserve a re-listen, but approaching a dozen times, for each, I think really gives credit to the quality of information he has in there.
How do you what is this word, cortical architecture?
Yeah, so it's like, I guess like a derivative of the cortex.
Cortical architecture. Is that how you spell it?
Yeah, that looks correct.
Architecture. All right, cool. I put a little link to your JS Brains thing here, and then I also put a link to, and I told you about this hack that I do. When I explain things to people, I just ask Perplexity and then copy the conversation so people can have all the little nodes to go off of.
Oh yeah.
While you guys were talking, I just essentially terribly misspelled the question, tell me more about this and all that kind of stuff. And so it generated a little article for us around that. So I included those links and some fun stickies to get us going here.
Yeah, I love how you do that.
Cool. All right, so I'm going to, I personally think instead of voting, Stefano, I don't know about you, but I'd love to have Brian just dealer's choice, pluck some of these things off based upon what's top of mind for him. Like, I don't have a strong opinion about any of these topics. So Stefano, what do you think about offering Brian that opportunity?
I concur.
Okay.
Well,
go
then,
for it, Brian.
Let me
Tell
just
me which
start.
one you want to talk about.
There's two at the bottom. Those are the topics that I mentioned. Were brought up on the GitHub. So since they've been, since they've been in my mind, I'll just I'll give a brief overview of my thoughts there. So,
okay.
To elaborate on the software stability question, the sentiment was, now that the plugin is working properly, like, is there a way we can ensure the stability? And I definitely see, why that would be desired. And it's something that I do try my best to accomplish. Like I want there to be a stable version of the software, so any new user that comes to get the plugin, can just hop right in and not have any issues. But the trouble is that I see stability being on a spectrum with innovation. And, you know, the more stable the software, I think it's going to reduce the innovation of the software. So while I try to keep things working, you know, like I really don't want to promise like, you know, stability, because I think it's the innovation side of the spectrum where 10x outcomes will develop. And that I think contributes more to the primary mission, which is empowering individuals with AI, you know, through this open source software. By leaning towards innovation, I think even sacrificing stability, you know, for intermittent periods of time, I think in the long term, we will better empower individuals with AI by discovering new innovations, you know, by worrying less about stability and focusing more on, you know, like what might a 10x improvement look like. So I also, you know, from a development side of things, like I you know, created the early release for supporters so that, you know, there could be some level of stability in the main release. But there's always this like period of time where I need to update that stable release, and that, or like update that general release, and that's where the instability starts to arise. So, you know, like I would love to say that the software is going to be stable from here on out, but I think that's a promise I can't make, and it's one that I don't think I want to make, because I think, you know, for the long term, you know, mission, innovation is the goal. So did you guys have any questions about that?
I do. Do you mind if I like ask you like some almost interview style cutting questions? Because you know me, I support your mission wholeheartedly, but then I do think there's a perspective that I think people would want to like better understand. So do you mind if I like sort of like, I'm going to seem like I'm coming at you, but I'm actually just trying to challenge you, because I think it would be healthy to have people better understand what you're getting at. Is that okay?
I 100% love that.
Okay.
You know,
Cool.
sounds good.
So one question that I have for you is, if stability is necessary for there to be adoption and usage, then where are you positioned? You know, part of me goes to like, from like a runway funding vision perspective, like if that were to happen and then user base were to drop, or I think more importantly, the cohort of people who are deep power users, you know, give up and potentially don't return, like how does that impact your journey towards your vision? Is that you seem to be describing that the conditions don't require you to like stability isn't as necessary as maybe certain power users or people, you know, believe that it should be. Is there any truth in that? Like, what's your position with respect to that? First of all, does the question make sense? Because I just thought of a simpler way to ask the question. So if the question doesn't make
if
sense.
you think there's a simpler way, that'll also give me some time.
If your user base were to plummet, can you still continue?
So I think that the answer to that is yes, because while that would be negative, that would be a negative impact on progress. The reason why I think I would still be able to continue is that there is a lot to do with marketing and growth type of plans that I've been sort of just collecting these like ideas and these different like avenues and directions I could go along those lines. So I think that the recovery from that situation is very much doable. And for the same reason,
helps provide clarity, I think, which is useful. I think I'm tracking exactly what you're saying. Yeah.
Because I think that I've been putting the marketing and growth in the same bucket as stability, where like right now, if I spend my energy on that marketing and like growing the user base, then that actually like not only directly, takes my focus away from the innovation, but it also increases the need for stability. Because presumably if I'm going on that like marketing growth route, I'm trying to either sell more subscriptions or get more supporters. So then I feel more obligated to keep those people happy. And that would increase the urgency and the importance of that stability. But right now, I have like a pretty okay runway where I can, feel comfortable just, like going the direction that I see best for, creating the best software and the best like innovations with regards to that for at least a few months. Like even if all the revenue stopped coming in, today, I could still, keep going for, at minimum a few months. And then, that would be prior to me even switching gears into the marketing. Because I would also still want to leave myself a few months, to get things going again from the marketing and growth standpoint. But, like if everything dried up today, I could still spend a few months working on improving those innovations. And when I came back to the marketing and growth plan, like assuming everybody just was like, okay, this doesn't work, we're not using it, well, then I would actually be able to move even faster on the innovations. And I would hope to come back with what, instead of being, hey, this is the same as all those chat with your PDF startups, except for it's in your Obsidian, like instead of just being like this alternative to all these things that exist, I would come back to the market with something extra, something new, and that's, I think that also lines up with how I see this persisting into the future. Because if I have a very stable software that does the same thing as a bunch of other software out there, then eventually, people are going to say, oh, well, you know what? I'm already in Google Docs all the time. So let me just use, Google's Notebook LM, or, like I'm already in Microsoft. So let me just use Copilot. Like if I don't focus on the innovating, I think that same drop in users is going to happen regardless of the stability, because there's going to be equivalent alternatives that may be more convenient than what's in Obsidian or with the application and ChatGPT.
Cool. So
Did that
I was
answer
sort
your
of,
question?
yeah, so I was sort of drawing this little picture. And what, for me, what it does is, as someone who's bought into the mission, but quite frankly, also my usage has absolutely tailed off in the last, I don't know, 3 months, part significantly because of my own factors, but also because it's difficult to get back in the pool if wherever I left things off and the settings don't work. Like, I don't even know if you noticed this, but in the last recording, when I was like, oh yeah, what about this little field? You probably didn't even notice that I hadn't even filled in the required fields to have the thing even work at all. And so you could immediately see from my configuration that nothing would work. Well, I hadn't seen those fields because I hadn't been in the pool for the last, 30 days. And so part of what's useful in what you're describing, and I sort of got a little bit of like my product manager type hat on here, is like with effort, intent. Like, part of what I heard you just describe as a story is like, right now, you're experiencing some growth without any effort or intent. So you're sort of at this inflection point, is if you stop, and I actually think this is what you described is a little bit different than this, but like, you could just keep trying to make things stable and things might continue to increase. I think what you're saying is that green line actually tapers off and crashes permanently if you just focus on stability. Whereas, if you do a little bit of mix of both, then you might be able to, stay, but it's still going to recover. If you don't actually worry about stability, sure, your users might plummet, but to the point, this black line where if they do get low, all you have to do is actually turn on with like effort and intent around marketing if you needed to do that. So I love how you're characterizing the fact that like the growth right now is based upon not as much intent around trying to grow user base, so you can afford to have attrition, as much as it from an emotional perspective might frustrate users because they've invested time, energy, and effort into a thing that they just want to work for them the way that they encountered it at first. Like from a bigger picture impact, you are differentiated enough that if you focus on innovation, it might hurt a little bit with some people, but it gives you the better shot that months down the road, you'll have something that they won't be able to get to again, from anywhere else, which is quite frankly where they encountered you the first time.
Yeah.
So I totally am picking up on
I love this diagram here. I think that yellow, like while the green would be great, I think the yellow is definitely what I anticipate happening. Like at some point, it's going to tail off and I'm going to need to put that effort in the marketing. I mean, that's been the plan the whole time. I see the current features, and this is probably, in my opinion, why things like really tailed off for you, is that the features are more of a novelty than truly useful.
Yeah.
And the reason why I know that is because I built this software. The reason I first built it was for myself, and I want to use it myself. And even my own usage, I see it tailing off. As far as the smart chat within Obsidian, I very rarely use the smart chat in Obsidian. I much more frequently use the Chat GPT version. But even that, like besides the transcribing, the Chat GPT, like where it currently is with the Smart Connect app, my usage has tailed off there as well. And then with the Smart Connections view in Obsidian, to show you similar notes, it can be so much better. So the reason why the suggestions are not, so much better, they've basically been the same, with the exception of bugs making the suggestions worse at times. But like as far as the underlying algorithms go, nothing really has changed there. But I see so much opportunity to improve, just that Smart Connections view itself. From being able to add feedback into the Smart Connections view, so that like, even if you look at the same note at a future time, the suggestions would be better.
Yeah.
And then that bleeds over into the chat being more useful.
Yeah, I wonder too, based upon what you're describing, and I know we can probably hop to the other part of the topic here, but the part of the effect, I think we were so, because, and I played video games, but it's not just a video game thing. Like in the last decade, the hijacking of what it really means to be like in alpha and early release, in like being a part of a thing that you get early access to something, and then the sort of mutual and understanding agreement that by definition that means a thing that's different than if it was software that you're paying for that's stable. I think that's gotten so watered down and dissolved that we're desensitized to it. And so like part of the the only reason I'm continuing to, I can't remember, I think I did the yearly plan. I was always confused as to whether or not there's a yearly plan or whatever, but like part of the reason I very quickly learned I'm actually not giving you a few $100 a year for an app. I'm actually giving it into a mission, and I think that transaction is probably not deeply understood, and that's not a you thing. That's just the pragmatic reality of how you get something that's innovation, that's from a small company without a lot of overhead, like a small entity without a lot of overhead. Like that's just part of it, and I think part of the struggle is just to grapple with that reality. Because I could also probably spend the equivalent or same amount of money to a corporation that is going to have 40 to 60% of the same things that maybe I would intend to do right now, maybe a little bit more with smart connections, but it's not going to check other boxes. Like I'm not going to be able to own the files and like the root of the data, and someone else is going to use my data. So like, I think it's just individual users. We as a community also just have to grapple with like what we're spending our money on. And there's no like universal right answer for people there too. Like it is completely understandable if people, thought they were going to be getting a stable thing, even though they probably are looking past the fact that they're not necessarily getting a stable thing. And then, I believe you would probably encourage people to say like, hey, if that's too much money for you to spend now, if you realize like, don't give me your money. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to go into that agreement with you is sort of what I'm picking up on from you as well, is like you want people to have what they need, and that's okay. Like you don't need, you would probably rather not have someone's money to have them have a false expectation of what they're actually getting in exchange.
That's 100% accurate. Like I'm really, even though, it was in the terms of the transaction not being a well understood, type of transaction, in general, I'm glad that you really picked up on, what I was trying to go for, so I really do position everything as, like you're supporting the project, like even the subscription, which is more of like a productization of the Smart Connect app for access via ChatGPT. Even that, I spent a lot of time making sure that I position the offer such that it's an offer to support the ongoing work on the project rather than purchasing this product. And I really have no hesitation if somebody comes to me and they say, you know what, I didn't I didn't know what I was getting into, can I get a refund? Like I will give you a refund, no questions asked, and you can keep the license key, for as long as it's active for. They do expire eventually. But the purpose there, like to, like for this positioning, was so that yes, I can fund the continued work, but also without bringing in unnecessary headaches, because if it was too strictly a product, there are, like while it's not very understood, this like support type of transaction, what is very well understood is that if you buy a product, you're going to get support, you're going to have expectations that the thing's going to work all the time. And I really wanted to avoid that expectation as much as possible. Not that everybody's going to understand everything immediately, but as far as getting into the second part of these two topics that were in there, I think we really did hit both already.
I think so.
That the growth plans, I mean, I've got a lot of cool ideas that I'm working on, like as far as innovating and improving the software. And that's where I really believe the growth is going to come from. While I could put this extra time into the marketing, I think that the real growth will happen, when the innovation happens such that when you look at the alternatives, it's no longer that they check 40 to 60% of the boxes. It's that when you look at the alternatives, they don't check that one box that matters most. And that I think comes from that innovation. And I think that's where the real growth happens.
Brian, that's excellent. It gives me a strong understanding, and I like the way you visualized kind of stability, innovation, tension, the natural tension that exists between those two goals. And I like the way things are going. One thing that has slowed me down maybe is, for instance, you're building for multiple platforms, And I think you're using a framework that lets you code once, distribute on Mac and Windows platforms. So in the case of Smart Connect, for instance, it's a forced update. And my feeling was that you did that so that you got everybody up on the same code stream. And that's going to probably reduce the support that you need to provide. You don't have 3 versions of Smart Connect out there across 2 different platforms with minimal resources trying to support that. But sometimes that forced update puts me in a position where what was working isn't working any longer, or there wasn't adequate documentation and I didn't understand that action groups is now where you go to fiddle with custom GPT settings, that sort of thing. In the case of the plugin, you've allowed a contributor to go into an advanced version with a cautionary note that it might be less stable, but you're going to get a first glimpse at some innovation that I'm providing. And if it doesn't work for you, there's a revert back to a known, more stable version. So I don't have an ultimate answer to that, but so I understand your thinking and your motivation to do what you've done with Smart Connect. So I'm tolerant of that. But I'm wondering if and also when I stuck my hand up and said, hey, I'll write some documentation, and then realized, man, I can't keep up with the pace. What version of the product am I going to be writing documentation for? Which one am I going to be screenshotting? Which one am I going to develop a video for? So I kind of quickly jumped in the back of the line at that point and said, wow, I can't keep track of that. So some of that organic marketing could happen maybe if we did have a body of documentation that was for a known stable release. And here we have this more innovative, cutting edge set of releases, and you kind of use at your own risk, adopt as needed. And if it doesn't work for you, you can revert back. I don't know if that makes sense. That was a ramble.
No, I think it makes a lot of sense. So I just I'm making a note for myself. Basically, I think what you're sort of asking is, can there be a early release and stable release for the Smart Connect app similar to the plugin?
That's
what I heard.
I have those thoughts on occasion. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just making a quick note to myself here. Allow stable release for SC app. So I've had some thoughts about how that would work for the Smart Connect app. I think up until fairly recently, it would have been more difficult because, like everything you said was true. There was one part that you missed, which is there's a server component with the Smart Connect app. So one of the reasons I needed to make sure that the latest update was always forced was because if I made any changes to the server, the prior version may no longer be compatible. However, the server has been very stable. I haven't I've pretty much I've made sure that pretty much all the logic happens in the application rather than the server. The server is about as bare bones as it can get. So I think that having a stable and early release for the Smart Connect app is definitely doable. I don't want to give any sort of ETA for that, but my thought on how it would work would be something like, like I would still potentially force an update on the stable release, but only if necessary. And then so what it would look like is there would be some sort of like, update now button that pops up for getting to the latest release, unless, there's some sort of breaking compatibility issue and I need to force it. And I think that there's, we're definitely approaching a point with that software where implementing that makes a lot of sense. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because that'll make sure I add a little extra priority to that. Is there anything I missed, like with regards to, like what would make sense for this for you?
No, I think my omission of the server component, and then I I don't use the plugin Smart Chat that much. Um, uh, my vision was I could use custom GPTs to interface through the Smart Connect proxy to my vault of notes. And that's kind of where I gravitated towards using this. Then it gave me a couple control points. It gave me OpenAI's custom GPT controls to upload additional files, write custom instructions. It also gave me the Obsidian alignment notes and what I can do there. So I felt I had this Obsidian and custom GPT configurability around my Raspberry Pi second brain, or my old guy Health Vault that I wanted to have. So that's where I went with it. I seldom do I use the Smart Chat inside of Obsidian.
Yeah, good to know about that. I think that the Smart Chat will actually pick up in adoption. Like right now, I'm working on a major, essentially a refactor of those components, which really just kind of brings them up to speed with the other components. And one of the outcomes of that will be actually bringing the actions that are available in ChatGPT, bringing that into the Smart Chat. And, so one of the reasons why I think that'll be, very interesting to a lot of people is like right now, those actions are limited to, use in ChatGPT, which personally I like because I don't have to worry about token usage. So there's no surprise API bills. And, like up until this O1 preview model, which seems to be incompatible, with the custom GPTs. Up until then, you're always able to use the latest models, with these actions. But the point about getting the chats in the Smart Chat is that's going to open up all of the other platforms. So whether you want to try Anthropic or any of the other chat model providers out there, having the Smart Chat integrate with the Smart Actions, I think will allow, people to, that don't want to use OpenAI for whatever reason, to use whatever their preferred provider is.
Including self-hosted models.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, good. Yeah,
And
I would.
yeah, you're interested in the self-hosted models?
Yeah, I have several of those, and one of my former colleagues I'm introducing to that, and we're going to train a model self-hosted for their business needs, and so we're coming up to speed on that. But I would use that then. If I had the actions, the smart actions in Obsidian, and was able to save money and on my own self-hosted models, I probably I would stay in Obsidian more.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And I also think it's surprising to me that like Anthropic and Google haven't come out with something similar to custom GPTs yet. I really, that's one of the reasons why this, Smart Chat update hasn't happened sooner, is because I sort of imagined if Google's Gemini and Anthropic's Claude had a layer that was equivalent to the custom GPTs, that it would just make a lot more sense, for people to, pick their preferred provider, and that would, that would sort of pigeonhole the Smart Chat into local models only, which is there's a huge demand for the local model integration, but while I think it's a very vocal demand, I don't think it's, I don't think it's representative of the like broader market. I think the broader market mostly just wants to use the platforms that are accessible via the cloud. But like I definitely see that local model integration is very valuable because there is a market for it where they don't have there's not too much user friendly software in the self-hosted LLM space. It's all fairly technical, and I think Smart Connect can make it much easier to use those, with the Smart Chat integrated into Smart Connect.
Yeah, I agree. You have to have some infrastructure to self-host a model. So I agree.
I got a question for you. We were talking about the smart actions, and it sounds like that's going to be a cool thing. I'm to be completely frank with you, don't know the value prop or like a good usage example of smart actions, and I just like cranked open my Smart Connect app itself, and it's not self-evident to me. Like, did we have like a brief sort of description? I can even show my smart app thing, I think, if I need to. Like,
yeah, I think I'm very happy you brought up that question. So smart actions. Smart actions right now, they are very limited to just what I call CRUD operations, which is create, read, update, or destroy or delete your notes. So, the actions are very much geared to, being able to pull in the notes as context. And then, with the more recent updates, making editing those notes also possible, which, like there are definitely some issues in the pipeline that I'm aware of with the editing. But, those should be cleaned up in some future releases. But the overall, like, so while the smart actions are currently limited to just interacting with notes in markdown format, one of the objectives of the backend architecture that I've been working on is to abstract the markdown pieces of the logic and have them confined to a clear, like this is where the markdown logic happens, so that we can then add additional file types. And the first one of those is going to be PDF. Unfortunately, we won't be able to edit PDFs, but having that read ability, I think, is going to add a lot of value for a lot of people. But it doesn't stop at just file types. So the way I look at how the markdown is imported or the PDFs would be brought into the system, I look at those files as external sources, and there's virtually unlimited external sources that can be integrated into the platform. So something that I've been I've been trying to get everything cleaned up with like everything that's public, but like something I really want to work on, like that's like a personal prototype that will eventually be public, is where the file system integration is right now. Adjacent to the file system integration, a browser integration. So what that would look like is you have this like browser smart action, where you say, okay, I want to create a smart action for my Twitter timeline. So you put in the link to your Twitter page, and it will open up the Twitter page, be able to pull in your content from Twitter. And in addition, because of the way it works, would be a browser integration, and that has a lot to do with the underlying framework that Smart Connect uses. So the reason why Smart Connect works on all the different platforms is because at the core, it's essentially a Chrome browser. So since we already have that core Chrome browser, when you put in your Twitter link, even though they want you to sign in, when you do sign in, all of that authentication just persists in the browser as it would if you were using any other Chrome browser. So that really makes the whole authenticating with virtually any website, it makes it the same as if you were just logging in via your normal browser.
Oh, interesting.
Which that removes a lot of complexity from the development standpoint, because being like let's say you were building an automation and you wanted to scrape Twitter. Well,
yeah, I was about to say, you're talking, it feels like almost like RPA, like kind of stuff, like screen scraping type things, but it's not that.
So it's actually not it's not screen scraping, because with the browser, we would actually have access to the exact HTML. And I imagine the workflow could be, fairly simple to build these custom browser actions for a non-code, like somebody that doesn't like program themselves. So it would be like this no code paradigm, because you put in that URL, and I've briefly mentioned this before, but there are going to be like community actions. So there might be a Twitter browser action that already has a lot of this set up. But just for the sake of discussion, imagine that there's just a generic browser action. You put in the Twitter link, you log in, and then you have ChatGPT say, okay, now get the link. And then ChatGPT gets all of the HTML from that page. What you can do from there is have the ChatGPT come up with what they call selectors, and this may be like a CSS selector, it could be XPath, anything that is compatible with JavaScript. And then, by simply discussing with ChatGPT based on the HTML that was returned by the action, the ChatGPT can come up with like, hey, here are these selectors. We can name them as such, so that when you call this action in the future, instead of returning all of the HTML, the action will just return the content at these selectors. So, maybe you say, I just wanted to return my most recent tweet. So then you can, when you call this action, it returns your most recent tweet. Or maybe you wanted to return all the tweets. I think that development right there, just with that browser component, I think that there's going to be a whole lot possible from that point. So, what I was just mentioning would be the read type action. But then there's, also input. Like I also want to be able to say schedule a tweet. I think that the same workflow should be possible to say, okay, now I need you to click the create tweet button. I need you to come up with the selector to click the, schedule the tweet button. And then, from the point of just having this generic browser action, adding a URL, and then talking to ChatGPT, I think you could have both data come into the system, which can be saved similar to how notes are saved. So, the tweets can be surfaced even in the Smart Connections pane. But in addition, have actions to be able to say, okay, now that, we know what my last tweet was, now let's schedule a new tweet. And, Twitter really just represents any website out there that you may want to retrieve data from and interact with.
And what's interesting is one of the things you're describing. Are you familiar with RPA, like the space around RPA? That
Very much so, yeah.
Okay, cool. It has been probably 7 years since I messed around with RPA, but my background was in like business process automation with IBM. But what you're describing is what sort of I remember when I had to do like, and the only thing I got certified on was like UiPath, but that idea of like programmatically navigating the DOM of a page and then building in things and adding, different sort of like the idea of there's literally no application that you couldn't technically integrate with at varying levels of interfaces. This was relevant and sounds like it still remains relevant when you like don't actually have API integrations. How do you layer in something that you actually need to have an API for on a platform that architecturally isn't even designed to be able to have an API? And so sort of what you're talking about has a lot of like, it feels a lot of like sort of similar domains as what RPA, solutions have been trying to sort of work on. And I'm sure they're all I haven't looked at this industry in years, but I'm sure they're all branded as AI enabled now, attempting to do what you're talking about. Doing.
Yeah, I think one of the key differences is that, from what I remember, a lot of, what you'd be building in something like UiPath is the workflow. So you have like this flow chart from going from start to finish. What Smart Actions provide are each of the nodes in that workflow. And then as far as, like getting to them in the correct order, we're actually able to rely on ChatGPT for coming up with that order. And I think that there's ways that we can sort of force, flows or workflows in the future. But I think just having the ability to create those nodes and then let the AI access those nodes in whatever order might be, best for the, the current task, I think that's hugely valuable.
Yeah, and that reminds me of like that's getting closer to this idea of like digital selves and the fact that like, oh, you have an agent. Well, you got your Matthews, researcher agent who needs to every single morning wake up and look at these feeds and if needed have another hit on 4 other feeds that might be relevant and then summarize it this way. And then, this month the Harvard Business Review article came out. So go to Harvard Business Review, actually understand and read these things to figure out what's relevant and still an ethically responsible way to then compile that for Matthew so that when he gets in his office at 8:30 in the morning on, February 4th, 2025, he's essentially got an agent that has done all of these things that he didn't have to pay a RPA developer to go program a workflow. Like, I think that's sort of the future you're talking about there.
100%. And I think that, just for a little glimpse of what I see, is coming is something, and this is something I, started actually working on a separate project that fizzled out, but it's, I think the idea is still there, and that is a smart inbox. So like by having these actions, it'd be, somewhat, trivial to just say like, now that you have that ability to get the content from Twitter, just say now check it every hour or something. As long as the application's running, it can, check at whatever cadence you want it to check, and then pull content into the system. So then, very similar to how you have the Smart Connections pane that shows you similar content, we create a new pane that is designed to prioritize based on what's out there and what's most relevant to you at this exact moment. And that, I think, is probably the culmination of all of the architecture changes that I've been working on. It's to provide a feature like that.
Yeah.
Brian,
that makes sense.
That is brilliant. And the last point on messaging, coming from my background, uh, knowledge gets locked into
Oh,
Hey,
we lost
Stefano,
you.
I think we lost you.
a folder. Oh,
Oh,
am I there?
maybe he's back. Yeah, now
Yeah,
you're back.
you're back.
Yeah, I think that last point of the mailbox access, um, the browser, I think that's brilliant. So Smart Connect's based on a Chromium uh, browser. It solves the problem of authentication against all these locked subscribe sites like medium.com, where I have a bunch of articles that I've bookmarked and put in my library. I have all these emails in certain folders that get forgotten and siloed away. And now I could, and a lot of the legacy products are kind of a pre-designed workflow. It's linear. You go here, then you go here, follow up with this stop in the workflow, and then I want to schedule it, and it's very manual. But if I could just let ChatGPT or some AI model help me decide, or just give it an instruction, uh, check this folder or check my Medium, and I start gathering all these knowledge tidbits from different sources,
Yeah.
aggregating them into my second brain, and then decide what I want to do with it.
Yeah. I know we're a little bit over time here, but what's interesting, I had a conversation, I probably was 10 years ago, when I stumbled upon the idea of something that's been going on for, hundreds, if not thousands of years. But I was like, wait, there's a job role called a chief of staff. Like, I heard of like chief of staff in like politics, but like I encountered this 10 years ago. Like corporations have chief of staffs, and I talked to somebody who had a chief of staff, and he was like, for hundreds, probably thousands of years, as you move up the scale of efficiency, but also responsibility and authority and power, like it's been figured out that you need to have, the term like right hand man, right hand woman, like you need to have people that you can delegate to and follow alongside you, just because the sheer scale and stakes are that much higher, as from an organization or a systems perspective you go up the top. And I think what you're trying to do is almost like democratize or flatten the idea of having digital chiefs of staff. That, it's, yes, there's the digital brain, but like the world is getting so complex that we're all sort of humans propped up against something that's getting even more and more and more and more complex. That, it's a proven pattern for 1,000 years that people with great responsibility or great power probably have people alongside them that are helping them do the thing. And that's what I'm picking up on, sort of like with your vision. That's cool.
That's a very, very interesting way to put it. I like it. It reminds me, I'm pretty sure it was like Charlie Munger, or, somebody that, writes, they say like, somebody in a higher position just needs somebody to also just like filter out all the bullshit from people. So, and I imagine that could be like the, smart inbox. And in that same vein, also how the inbox could actually help fight the misinformation problem. Because the misinformation problem is not that this, misinformation just exists. The problem is that it's in front of you and taking your attention. But, it's very possible that if you just have the things that are most important to you right up front, then the misinformation just doesn't even make it into your into your mind space, and then that really just reduces that effect.
Yeah, I can't help it. I know we're over time here, but I want to show you, and I gotta host another call, but I have to show you this, because what you just described hits on something I was consulting with a client earlier. Let's see if I can find this, earlier this week. I don't know if you're familiar with Let me get rid of this here. Oh, the scale is messed up here. Give me one second. I don't know if you're familiar with Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yeah.
But he talks about, he has a quadrant around like the important, important and urgent matrix. The idea that we sort of have to do some of the stuff over here. Quadrant 4 is stuff you just essentially always want to avoid. And the best way to keep getting more and more effective is try to shift stuff out of kill stuff in 3 and use that time in 2. So the idea of actually using time on important, not urgent things. A way to look at it from like return on your time is you get more return on your time working in quadrant, 2, this top right thing. I use this frame a ton to just talk about sort of the different patterns of how that effect works, but I added it to our little smart connection thing here.
Yeah, thanks for adding that.
Yeah, but because I think that's what you're trying to do is like you're trying to have essentially an agent that can handle some of this quadrant 3 stuff, and so that you can free up time to actually do more like higher order thinking, important, not urgent work, which is kind of neat. So
yeah,
anyway, sweet.
I think definitely. Yeah. I mean, I could talk all day about this, but I know we're already over time. I appreciate you guys, spending the extra time and, for contributing. It makes a big difference. So, and thanks again, Matthew, for organizing these.
Yeah, my pleasure. This was great. I just realized I forgot to actually capture the full recording, which is not that big a deal because the grain thing is here too. So because we had no unsavory interruptions, I will very quickly be able to just post the chat clips from this one. I'm probably just going to ignore last week's and then make sure I prioritize getting this one out sooner rather than later. So because I know you want to share some of the stuff out too. So I'll get that stuff done today, and I'll post it in the Lean Coffee channel.
That's awesome.
Brian and Matthew, thank you both.
Yeah.
One burning question for our viewers, though, I know, Brian, is with the ceiling fan, the colorful shirt, the coconut trees you have in your icons. I'm trying to pinpoint your location. Is it?
I guess wrong, Stefano. The first time I did it, I guessed wrong.
Okay, so Hawaii comes to mind. Me being a West Coast kid, having visited Florida several times. There's that thought. Caribbean, some island that you own. So I don't know what it is, but I don't have my ceiling fan on in my house this morning. So
yeah, that ceiling fan is basically on permanently. So is the one in front of me. And that's because here in St. Petersburg, Florida, it is just constantly hot.
okay.
There's a month out of the year where it's too cold, and then for the rest of the year, I walk outside and I have a good habit of just quick rinsing off in the shower because it's the only way to, survive. You need to rinse off all that sweat that you're undoubtedly going to pour. But yeah, St. Petersburg, Florida, I can't say enough good things about it. I never lived somewhere that I loved as much as St. Petersburg. It's great here. And I think a lot of people are discovering it. The prices are going crazy. I live in this little condo right on the water. I'll do a quick, I don't know if you can see out my window there, but there's like a bunch of boats out there. I guess because I have this, I don't know. I don't want to mess around and waste more time by unblurring, but I've got a canal there with dolphins that come by. I basically do all of my thinking out by the bay, Tampa Bay. It's just, beautiful. I'm out there at sunrise. I'm out there at sunset, walking around with my stack of note cards, just thinking about these things. I come in here, get them dumped into my Obsidian and start working my way through, figuring out what's next. And honestly, the reason why I'm just going on about this is because I think to myself sometimes, I'm like, who the hell are you to think that you can do what you're doing? And then I think to myself, who better to try to empower individuals with these tools than somebody who just is like, also an individual trying to empower themselves, and somebody who's been fortunate enough to live in a place where they just love doing it.
Mhm.
And that's
Yeah,
all I
very
have
cool.
to say about it, about
Love
my
that.
location.
Well, we're
All right,
we're
guys, I
great.
am
We're
late to hosting a
grateful.
call.
We're
We
grateful.
are grateful for sure. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm
Keep
grateful
up
for
with
you
getting
guys.
those cards. All right. See everybody later. Have a great
All right.
weekend.
Be well.